Welcome to the Cooperation in Education podcast series. In this limited series, we will dive into the future of higher education and explore how cooperations can transform learning experiences. This podcast series is part of the Cooperation in Education Knowledge Gateway project, in short, the CIE Gateway project. CIE Gateway is an international project that aims to support educators in better preparing their students for the dynamic and challenging world of work. We do that by 1. Encouraging multidisciplinary and external collaborations, 2. Fostering engagement with industry and society for educational practice, and 3. Equipping academic staff with tools and resources to enhance education delivery. The CIE Gateway project unites partners from 4 countries across Europe: IMTBS from France, FH Münster from Germany, UIN for the Netherlands, and Young from Finland. The CIE Gateway project is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the authors only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the Finnish National Agency for Education. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them. Hi, welcome back to our Cooperation in Education podcast series. I'm your host, Maynara Furkin, a researcher at the FH Münster, working on the CIE Gateway project. In today's episode, we will discuss the topic Engaging Students, Strategies for a Student-Centered Classroom. And today I have a very special guest with me, Pigalle Tavakkoli, a true innovator in the field of experience design and education, whom we have the pleasure of welcoming to our podcast. Hi, Pigalle. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Maynara. Thank you so much for inviting me here today as well.
Thank you, Pigalle, for being here and accepting our invitation for this talk. Pigalle is the founder and the director of the School of Experience Design to empower people to create high-impact experience. And she was awarded as an Empowering Learning Journey Hero by the Educators for Impact about her methods and innovative teaching techniques. And we are incredibly excited to have her as an expert in experience design to explore how it can be implemented in collaborative projects, in classrooms and teaching, especially discussing strategies for student-centered classes to help educators to engage more with their students. So let me start saying that your background is amazing. Sounds super, super great and awesome. So could you just share a bit more about your journey, how you ended up there and what is it about?
Yes, thank you, Maynara. I have quite an extensive background, so I'll try and give a potted version of it. So I was a creative producer for 15 years, and I specialized in facilitating collaborations between scientific researchers and artists, and using that collaborations as the means through which we engage the general public. And then while I was producing for 15 years throughout the UK, and then running alongside that, the last 12 years, I also started teaching. With a colleague, we set up and developed the first course in experience design in the UK. And basically what was really amazing about the opportunity to teach while I was producing is it meant that I walked the walk before I talked the talk. So I didn't start from an academic desk-based research background. I started from literally being in a muddy fields at festivals and in museums and in outdoors on the streets. And I actually learned about how to design impactful experiences that transform people's lives directly through doing it and learning and observing and evaluating the impact on the audiences. And they taught me. So there was a two-way dialogue. As much as I was sharing with them scientific research in accessible, entertaining, spectacular ways, I was also learning from them on how they react, what they learn, and that guided me to developing my approach, my methods. And through teaching, what was so fantastic was I had to start thinking, what is it that I'm doing? Why does it work? And how can I turn that into a very simple, clear to understand method that anyone else from around the world can use and apply it to their projects and practices? So teaching in the classroom for 12 years really gave me that discipline and skill. And through all of that, the culmination of it has been really consolidating my knowledge into a whole experience design system with a clear methodology, a toolkit, and also a way of teaching. So I've also developed my methods of teaching. I also train teams, so for facilitation methods, and all of that's been learnt by doing it and learning from the students, learning from my audiences. So yes, in the end now, at this point in my life and sort of journey and career, I feel really lucky that I actually got to do that concurrently, because both sides really fed into developing my holistic, multidisciplinary approach and practice.
That sounds awesome. It was a lot of work throughout all these years, but as you just mentioned, it's worthy because you see how far you went from so much and so much exchange, and it is so great to hear. And I see also that it is a two-way. It needs to be, otherwise, how to engage. And I think this is what we are also trying to tell the audience and the educators, that that's how it is. It is a two-way. It's an experience. It's not a classroom, just class. I teach you here and you learn and that's it. But thank you. That is super interesting. And how did it lead you then to develop this method of, as far as I understand, more student-centered classrooms? So as you said, it's not about scientifically, but it's about exchanging and then developing a method per se.
So I developed a student-based approach because primarily I have a human-centered approach to everything that I do. And so inherently in my own core values, I believe strongly that we are meant to be more equal, and that we all have a lot to give and we all have a lot to learn from each other. So I would say that all the experiences I designed were about breaking down the barriers and the hierarchies between scientists and non-specialist public and artists and the public who might not think of themselves as creative, and to actually unify everyone to realize that they have more in common than they realize rather than differences, and they have a lot to learn and be inspired by each other's approaches. So the way that I produced, I naturally brought that into my approach with teaching. And with teaching, I'm very much about moving away from the hierarchical didactic approach, traditional approach, which is the teacher is on a plinth or a platform and talks at the students and offloads their expertise and knowledge, and the students are meant to be grateful acolytes who just soak it up as passive sponges. And for me, that's not what I enjoy to do. Because I've been teaching now for more than 12 years, I've had the benefit of time of having different generations of students coming through. And I have so much to learn from each of the new generations coming through. And they help me to stay plugged in, to stay current, to be aware of the circumstances and conditions and contexts that are affecting them and their lives and how the world is changing. Otherwise, as a practitioner, as a teacher, in all the work I do, I would get stuck in my own viewpoint, my own previous expertise, and I would become out of date. So I see the students and what they have to give just as valuable and exciting as what I would like to share with them. Mm-hmm. So I think as a teacher or as a facilitator or a team trainer, it's not about me. It's not about what I know. It's about what I can share to activate and open up the potential in each of the students in front of me. And the students are people, and I believe that everyone has huge potential, and that's what drives me. I'm really passionate about drawing out people's potential, and I just want to create the conditions, hold space. People feel that they can trust the space, they feel secure, they can be vulnerable. There's no such things as mistakes. I don't use that kind of language, and it's open dialogue, experimentation, and this journey of discovery that we both go on together.
That sounds really great. And coming from also different teaching or as a student or being in different teaching methods involved, definitely I can relate to that. And I understand where you come from and why you tried this approach, definitely. And it's really inspiring to hear your dedication and really empowering them to participate and use this innovative teaching method that you created and that you put it into practice. And as you said, it is not the perfect and doesn't not need to be. Then in this point, I would like then to explore strategies to have this student-centered perspective and how the educators can actually implement that. So my question to you is, how do you think educators around the world, regardless discipline, can foster a classroom culture that really empower the students, encourage them to collaborate and have this relationship that you just mentioned?
I think a really crucial aspect of that is the very moment they walk in through the door. And I think quite often when a new cohort of students come in, as tutors and educators, we often have a whole load of housekeeping we need to go through with them, set up the course, set up the content. And I think we miss how important that beginning moment is when they arrive, because the atmosphere we set up and the conditions that we prepare sets up the rest of the course and the rest of the dynamics of the way the cohorts are going to relate and connect with each other and relate with me and connect with me. So I actually put a lot of thought and I allocate time for the whole beginning of every course that I do. And what I actually start with is group exercises for the cohort to meet each other. I don't start by introducing myself, because my ethos is they're all coming from different parts of the world. So we have all levels of experience and expertise and multicultural viewpoints as well. And there is a wonderful richness in that. And so I like to start by actually fostering connection between the students to start drawing out what are their special qualities, what are the multitude of views and perspectives they have. So I have a whole series of warm-up exercises, and the exercises are active as well. So I also choose to change the shape of the classroom. I like to create this open atmosphere. So I create an open circle with the chairs and I move all the tables to the side of the walls. So everybody's in the same level, all with the same viewpoint. And I sit on a chair at the same level as them. They are immediately engaged. They're immediately with each other. And the warm-up exercises, they have to get up. They have to move around. They have to do things. So I set the tone that this is going to be dynamic. This is going to be hands-on. You're going to be meeting each other. You're going to be collaborating with each other. You'll be mixing, the groups will get mixed up as we go along. So you have the chance to get to know each other more. And each of your inputs are valuable. They all have incredible perspectives and expertise to bring to the table. So by the time I finished all the warm-ups and then I give a little introduction, very short introduction to myself, it really sets the tone that this is a space about them. It's a space about them growing, learning from each other as much as they're going to learn from me. The time spent at the beginning sets up the conditions for the rest of the course and for the students to have a certain mindset and approach where it fosters their curiosity, it fosters collaboration, it fosters a sense of safety and security. And it means they're already in an elevated mental space to be open to learning. And then we can really then lift off. And if there are any resistance or doubts or issues, they come up very early on. So I would say that first bit, a lot of educators might not be so aware how crucial it is, and it makes teaching later much easier.
That's super interesting to hear. It's just the first contact. I introduce, they introduce, and we move on, we start. And in the end, you learn so much. As you just said, you can learn so much already from the students that will help you how to modify or how to adapt your classes further on during the course. Then taking from there, can you tell us more about this approach of creating this non-hierarchical classroom environment that you mentioned? And also, why do you think the students, or how do you think the students feel empowered to collaborate and then contribute to this whole process and this learning environment in a format that is usually non-traditional, this non-hierarchical format?
I like to have a dynamic mix of very visual presentations. They lead with a big image, and then there's maybe one or two sentences underneath. But the dynamic mix is the visual presentations of a key method or a key framework, and immediately an activity where they collaborate in groups to test and apply that method. So they go in breakout groups, and then they get messy and they do lots of things, and then they come back to the circle, and then I get the teams to present what they've come up with, and more importantly, what their process was in how they developed their particular idea and how they found the method. So each team presents, and then after the presentations, I ask the teams to feedback. So they learn how to give constructive feedback, critical thinking in a kind and supportive way, and how to receive beneficial feedback that can then help to develop your ideas. And then we go back into the next method or framework. So we go between a visual presentation and trying it out, feeding back, and then I'll give some final notes to just push their thinking a bit further or things they might not have considered. And it's this constant dance between visuals and doing it, because I think it's true learning. I mean, it's not me that says this is very well known, but true learning is in the doing. So I would say that mix of visuals and doing is critical to the way that I teach. I'd like to add one more thing into the mix of this, because it may sound like the method I'm doing for the listeners, it might sound like a bit of chaos. And so I just thought to add to that I'm also a huge fan of structure as a producer. I'm highly organized to the nth detail, and I like to provide a space for the students which is combining strategy with creativity. I think the most amazing, powerful things happen when you bring things together, and it's in the intersections and spaces that innovation and great things can happen. So actually all my courses, all my team training are very, very structured, because what I'm planning to do is take them on a journey. It's not just a learning journey, it's an emotional journey as well, and it's a knowledge journey.
Yeah, that sounds like really a great approach. And I agree that structure is everything, and as a learning, if you don't have a structure, it makes everything harder, and that's not the point. The point is making it easier, right? That's what we are talking here. And can you give us other specific techniques or best practice or experience that you have to foster this collaboration and engagement environment? And that might be then helpful for the educators as they are listening. So as you mentioned, okay, the beginning of each session is really important. You learn a lot, but what else would you say they could do or you could recommend?
So I think it's important to build up collaboration. I think it's quite a lot to expect people to collaborate straight away. I think not everybody has experienced working collaboratively. It's not necessarily a style that suits every personality. So it's something I build up. So I start off the earlier sessions where people do things in pairs. So that's sort of just softly starting to get them practice in doing something with one other person, and then I mix the pairs up, and then I build it up to groups of 3s or 4s, and then gradually, and then midway through the whole course there can be larger teams, and I always remix people up. The other reason I remix people up is because the work they're doing is step by step. So a key method I like to use is visual ways of learning, and whenever I start start a session, if I'm lucky enough to have a week block in the same classroom, which isn't often, then I like to start the very first beginning of the first session with all the walls are blank and white. And then as they carry out their activities where they've been drawing or writing or putting sticky notes, they put them on A2 coloured sheets of paper and we start to stick them up on the wall. And so it means that the duration of the course, the wall builds up. And it builds up in the learning journey that they've done. So at any point in time, they can stand in that classroom and exactly see what they've learned, how they learned it, how it all makes sense. And it's a very clear and rewarding visual journey that they can feel proud of. And the other reason that's beneficial is because when they've worked on certain activities and they've produced the results and they've stuck it on the wall, when I mix the groups up, they will then be working under someone else's work because they'll be using that to develop it further to the next stage. So it also helps them to practice what it's like to have some ideas, leave it, and another team comes in and works on it. And then they go and work on some other ideas they had no part in creating, but they're building on it, building on it, building on it. So I think that method of visually building up the room has lots of layers, how it can help and benefit the students as a technique. I also try to use as many words from the professional environment and industries as possible and explain what they are to them. And so these things don't become a shock because it's so different to being in the classroom or at university or in the college. So I try to be that bridge of professional practice and study and application of it in real world environments with real human beings.
Yeah, definitely. That's the ultimate goal, to make the students this transition easier and smoother as possible. As I said, it's quite different. You have a controlled environment that you want to teach them. And when they go to the real world and real projects, and it's time pressure and it's so much more. And definitely, if you haven't had the chance to practice it before, it's way harder to adapt and make it out a good in the end. Do you mind sharing some tips, or what would you do in cases of resistance from the students in this engaging and collaboration? So how can educators actually overcome, in your opinion, any tip for them to help them to overcome this?
So I've learned over time that sometimes you get a student who just doesn't want to be there for whatever reason. They're in that classroom and for their own personal reasons, where they are in their life, things that have happened to them, what's going on in the future for them, they just don't want to be there. I used to pour a lot of energy into trying to bring them out of themselves and gain their interest to get involved. But I've learned over time that actually this is depleting my energy that I can give to 99% of the people in that room, where they're actually going to benefit from most of my energy. So I've learned that actually containment is a better strategy rather than convincing, because if they're sitting there mentally with their arms crossed, it's not my job to uncross their arms. There's a lot of reasons they're in that frame and mindset, and it's more than my role to tackle that. So what I try and do then is give them exercises that they can occupy themselves with, but not really put too much energy to trying to engage them deeply, because otherwise their sense of not wanting to be involved can spread. So it's more a strategy of containing them, giving them enough to get on with. And if there's a moment where it breaks through and they show a bit of interest with their eyes, or they have a response that I can encourage, if I get a glimmer of that, then I'll grab it. But sometimes you just can't, because that person has a lot of things going on in their life and it's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with the classroom. It's bigger than me in the classroom. And I respect that as well. So I give them enough to be occupied with, but I've learned not to lose my energy when there is everyone else that's open and receptive and wishing to learn and could benefit from more of my energy. So I think and again, it's about, being beyond our own ego as a teacher. It's not all about me. These students have a lot, they're whole people with all sorts of things going on in their lives, and I'm just a moment in their lives. And so I also want to appreciate and respect that for them as well. So yeah, I've learned over time that approach, and I find it works.
That's great to hear. Um, I understand where you come from, and it's in the end, it's about the respect. As I said, they are people. They, as you, we all have problems, we all have issues, and there are days we are happy, there are days we are not happy, and that's life, right? So it is a real human approach of, okay, I'm here if you need me, I'm here to share with you, I'm available. But in the end, it also requires the other side. Ne? You also have your boundaries, your limits, and it is okay that to happen, and let me contribute to those who wants me to contribute to them. That's awesome to hear. Thank you so much. And just before we wrap up, I would like to give you the space again to, if you have any final thoughts or recommendations or anything else that you would like to point out to help educators while they are pursuing to create this student-centered classroom culture that they engage and collaborate and make the whole experience more enjoyable.
Actually, it's great that you've offered me this space to add in an extra point, because I've just realized this, even though we're coming to the end of the podcast, there's a really important point I'd like to share, which is again very underestimated, and that's the role of play. And I'm very passionate about how important play is. So, as children, we do now understand that play is fundamental for their development of cognition, of motor neuron responses, of their bodies, of socializing, of all their forms of development. Play is a critical form which allows children to develop. And we now do understand that through various scientific research studies and lots of research carried out into that. And yet, once we leave kindergarten, nursery, primary school environment, we are then told to grow up and become sensible and don't waste time playing. And I just constantly find that incredible. We, as adults, we become fearful of allowing people to play. In the work environment, there's a huge fear of allowing staff to play. And yet play is the most critical and best way of learning. And play is learning. Play isn't anything else. And I'm really passionate about that. And I think that the more we can introduce playful methods, the more we can introduce space for play, the greater the learnings will become, and the more memorable and long-lasting the methods will be for the individuals that have been involved in play. And the reason is because there are many definitions of play, and I'm not talking about games, because games have rules and there's a goal and there's a point at which you finish the game and there's a winner and a loser. So my definition of play is where it's purposeless and there is no aim and there is no get to the end for the result to be good or bad. And the reason I describe that definition of play is because it's the process and what you learn in the process that's intrinsically valuable and beneficial long term. And I'm all about what you learn in that process, which will equip you beyond this exercise to life learning and life living. And so I am very, very happy to bring in and celebrate play as a really important method and technique, which I actively encourage other educators, teachers, and trainers to embrace.
That's so nice to hear, and I completely agree. It's so underestimated. And I also have read the same, that it is how we learn best. And as kids, after we are taught or we are said, okay, your playing time is over. Now grow up and be grown up, be an adult. And it's like, why, right? And why taking the fun out of it? Or not the fun as is meant, just for the purpose of doing it and not have a winner or loser or I'm better than you or whatever. No, it's not the point. And it's so much interesting. I'm so happy you brought that as well. And I'm happy you had the space here. And I hope the audience also thinks that and reflect on that and find ways to then implement this play aspect in learning and in teaching, which is definitely very valuable. I definitely shared the thought with you. And with
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's episode, we encourage you, fellow educators, to explore these opportunities for collaborative projects, collaborative learning and teaching. So interact with each other, talk with each other, share. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today in this episode with incredible Pigalle Tavakkoli about engaging students, strategies for a student-centered classroom. And thank you once again, Pigalle, for being here. We hope you enjoyed as much as we did.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Thank you for tuning in into today's episode. Join us as we continue to explore collaborative projects and their role in the future of higher education. Follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. If you're interested in further materials, check out the show notes of this episode where you will find a link to our project website. We will fill it with further content and resources in the upcoming weeks. Cooperation in Education podcast series, where collaboration meets inspiration.